Hi, team, and welcome to our first podcast for sociology. We're going to be looking at graffiti today and talking a little bit about how it plays a role in our society and around the world. We're going to be looking at some specific artists, highlighting them, and then using this lecture as like a base for you to be able to start your project. So, graffiti started in ancient times. It was used as a way to tell stories, leave messages, really leaving helpful hints for people as they're passing by, knowing that people were nomads and traveling from place to place following their food in order to survive. So when we look inside caves, you'll see images of how to hunt, how to gather, how to communicate with each other is really the origins of what we see in graffiti. Graffiti morphed over time into murals, having a combination of multiple pictures being put together can create a mural, or you can have just one big, large painting, which could also be a mural. But graffiti comes from the Italian word graffito. It means to scratch. So they think about like scratching or etching into a wall like we did in ancient times. That's where this comes from. It also talks about decorating a plaster to reveal a background of different colors. So if you've ever, when you were a kid, did the papers that have like multiple colors and you paint black over it and then you scratch little pieces off, it's kind of that same concept of creating images, obviously much more sophisticated than that. But that's where it comes from. Historically, it starts to creep into World War II, where we have this image known as Kilroy was here. Kilroy was a cartoon that's not based on a human being. It was symbolic of Americans traveling around Europe. So what happened was, much like when the British in World War I, American soldiers created this little character of a Kilroy, a bald man with a large nose with his fingers looking over something. And it was graffiti that would be etched or painted or drawn on places, especially on beaches that were stormed throughout World War II, or areas that they took over in trying to defeat the Nazis or the Italians. So this was a symbol of American strength. It was a symbol of comfort because if you were an American troop landing in Europe somewhere, then you were able to see this image and then know that other American soldiers had been there before you. So it was comforting for them. And this takes off. We see it again throughout Korea and then again in Vietnam as well. So there are 5 different concepts of graffiti. Tags, so what's your name, right? What's your signature that you're leaving behind with your artwork? Throw-ups are something that's done by a crew or a group of people. Usually they have a couple of tags or names or signatures attached to that artwork, and the messages are typically painted together. In most areas of the world, graffiti is illegal, so having the throw-ups happen quickly helps people from getting caught and eventually paying fines or jail time, depending on what part of the world you're in. Pieces can be a scene or a mural that kind of really are representative of a neighborhood. So you can see multiple artists working together and layering images and layering messages on one wall or one area. Gang graffiti, I think that's probably the one that we're more familiar with, is the use of graffiti to claim property or to let a neighborhood know what gang is affiliated with that area. And then dissing, obviously, to put down people, right? So to go into another neighborhood that may be a rival gang and to throw up your taglines, your pieces of artwork that would then either be threatening or in some way taunting of another gang. So graffiti bombing is probably one of the most commonly used forms of graffiti, and that is going to be So sorry, puppy's barking, so we did a quick pause. But graffiti bombing is putting graffiti in places that are illegal, right? Putting them inside railroad stations, on the sides of cars, on the sides of trucks, on the sides of buildings. Usually when you're putting up graffiti, the goal is to have as many people as possible see what you've created, trying to get across some kind of message. It goes up usually illegally. New York City was having a lot of trouble with this, and so they created this place known as the 5 Points. It's in Queens, New York. It was actually unfortunately torn down about 5 years ago, and now it's turned into condominiums. So New York has been gentrifying, and the 5 Points have been victim of that. But the unwritten rule was artists could come in, they could put up their graffiti, they could write any message they wanted, but it would only stay for a couple of days. So you'd put up this message knowing that someone else was going to come in and paint over it. But they created some really cool artwork in the process. When Tupac passed away, when he was killed, they created this artwork here. The children that are in this picture are not actual children. Those are also paintings. So this is like a really challenging form of artwork. It's really, really interesting too if you take a deeper study into it. But in Ireland, in Dublin, Ireland, where the band U2 records, fans are able to come to their recording studios. They're able to leave messages outside of the wall for the band members to come by and read and look. Sometimes it's tributes to the band, sometimes it's suggestions, sometimes it's just pulling out like lyrics that people fell in love with. So this is an area where the police kind of just turn a blind eye. It's not necessarily legal. One of the most famous graffiti artists is named Banksy, and this is some of their artwork. We don't know who Banksy is. They're anonymous. We don't know if they're male or female or non-binary, whatever the case might be. They have no identification. They think that they are British, but they're not 100% sure. But Banksy usually sends out a lot of messages, typically political, and he or she uses, I guess I should say, they use like shadowy characters in order to get their message across. So Banksy popped up a lot in the 2012 London Olympics, a lot of images of this shadowy character taking away rings from like the Olympic rings, so stealing different ones at different times. The 2012 Olympics actually used graffiti in order to promote the Olympics during the time too. So you see the police officers standing there and watching that happen. New York City is also using it in education. They're using graffiti to create positive messages. A lot of schools who were having trouble with graffiti on the outside of their buildings took hallways, white-walled them out, and allowed students to come in and kind of with the 5 points idea, create their artwork as long as it wasn't gang-related inside of the school building. There's an artist, his name is Andrew Berardi. He's from New York City, and he is using like positive messages from education too, like success, make your mark, selling t-shirts and promoting artwork and artists within the New York City school system, trying to prevent students from dropping out, especially who may have this talent. Frank Shepard was in charge of the political campaign and advertising for Barack Obama when he ran for president, so you may be familiar with some of his work. And what we're going to do is use this information as just like a baseline. Obviously, I'm not an expert in graffiti, and I'm sure hopefully maybe some of you are. There's a really cool documentary on Netflix called About Banksy, if you're interested. The Twitter account is also really interesting for Banksy too, if you're looking for something to scroll through. It shows all of the artwork and then kind of where they've seen Banksy over time. But you're going to use this now to create your own graffiti. It can be something that you draw by hand. It could be something that you take photos of. It can be something that you trace, something you make freehand. It's totally open to you this year. Whatever works for you works for me. My only thoughts are that it shouldn't be a drawing. Like it shouldn't be like a political cartoon or a drawing with like word bubbles. It should be something that's very direct. And that it should be able to clearly get across a message. So it could be one word, it could be a phrase, it could be an image with symbolism hidden within the image. But I want you to really think about what you're trying to get across instead of just sketching out stick figures, right? That's not graffiti. So I'm asking you to look into this a little bit more, do a little research. We'll talk about this in class, but hopefully you got a little bit more background on graffiti. All right, have a great night.